Hello, everyone. We are SomerSand. Our guest is Rhiannon Jenkins.
Hey.
The subject of today is going to be improv and intimacy. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, about your improv life? Yeah.
Sure. So I started improvising a few years ago now. I originally trained in musical theatre and then kind of accidentally found my way into improvising from there. So up until recently, I was mostly improvising in London, in the UK, teaching at places like Hoopla and the Free Association, and performing with a couple of groups there and at improv festivals around Europe. But I've just moved to the States like 2 weeks ago. So I'm just starting to find my feet over here.
We saw you in Lyon, in France, and then you gave a workshop. I think it's called Hot Under the Collar.
Yes.
And it's about romance and intimacy in improv.
Yes.
So, tell us a little bit about the workshop itself.
So, that's a workshop that I do relatively regularly. I run, at the moment, I'm partway through running a whole year-long version of that's all online, where we meet once a month. And obviously we can delve a little more deeply into it than we could in a one-day workshop at a festival. But the focus of the workshop is really on how to comfortably and safely explore all kinds of aspects of romance and intimacy while we're improvising. So things like kind of acting process around how to convey in front of an audience that you are romantically interested in somebody, to more kind of logistical things like how to safely execute stage kissing, how to talk about your boundaries with a team, how to navigate scenes where you might be touching people more than you would in an average improv scene. It's good fun. It's a lot of talking, I think, because for a lot of people, it's the first time they've really thought in any depth about whether they would want to do that type of improv or how they would do that type of improv. So a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, and then just putting things into practice that we've talked about. And it's something I really love. I really love teaching because you can see a big shift in the way that people are approaching stuff quite quickly, which is always really nice, you know.
That's very interesting. Great. I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to give this workshop?
I think it's partially a little bit of what you were saying about other improv work. I think, and this is not to denigrate anyone else's work or anything, but I think, and I certainly, you know, if I'm leading a jam, for example, I would always say, like, we're not going to do any touching of bikini areas and we're not going to grope and grab at people, just from a safety perspective, because you're just being thrown on stage with people you don't know very well. But I think romance and sex and sexuality are such a huge part of everyone's lives. And a big part of improv for me is that it's a way for people to process things from real life, you know, and for an audience, they want to be able to see real stories, real people interacting with each other in a real way. And I think if we don't make any attempt to try to approach that side of life, then it shuts off a whole range of human emotions that you can show on stage. Especially because romance is such a big focus of a lot of storytelling. You know, rom-coms are huge and have always been huge. And I mean, most mainstream film, TV, books have some kind of romantic tinge to them, whether it's like a hero rescuing a damsel in distress or, you know, the X-Files where there's that underlying tension between Mulder and Scully. Like, people care about romance. People care about characters being human and having human emotions. And I really like playing characters that flirt with each other, characters that fall in love. But I don't ever want to do that in a way that is unsafe or uncomfortable for people. So for me, I guess running this workshop is just about giving people the tools to be able to have the conversations that you need to have with a group. If you're going to do something that opens up the possibility of romance in scenes, you know, any kind of narrative in an ideal world should at least have the possibility of, oh, these characters might fall in love or have a passionate tryst or whatever. And I just want to be able to give people the tools to be able to do that without harming each other, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the key of the workshop, because when you do intimacy on stage, it doesn't mean you are allowed to do everything you want. You need consent between the two people. Could you give some examples of tools you hand out to people to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest tool for me is talking before the action happens. You know, if you're a group that knows, okay, we would like to open ourselves up to intimacy on stage, then I think having a session where you sit as a group and go, okay, what is on the table for us as a group and what isn't? You know, are we happy to touch each other? Are we happy to embrace? Are we happy to touch each other in more intimate parts of our body? Are we happy to do stage kissing? Are we happy to simulate sex even? Generally, I think that's relatively unlikely. There's maybe one or two groups that do that, but I wouldn't say there are many improvised groups that quite go that far. But, you know, stage kissing is a big thing. And then if as a group there is someone who says, well, actually, you know, I'm not very comfortable with stage kissing, then talking about other ways that you could still show romance. You know, maybe you work with your tech to have the moment where, you know, the characters get like this close to each other is when you black out. Or perhaps you turn your bodies away from the audience so it looks like you're embracing, but you're still keeping your faces away from each other. Or, you know, you're doing the stage kissing where you've got your thumbs in front of your mouth. Yeah, I think that's the first tool. My cat has just decided to join me here. This bit. So, yeah, talking is, I would say, the biggest tool that I share with people, is just opening up those conversations. Exercises that I like to do to help people kind of get into intimacy are often things that encourage people to speak less. I think when you guys were in the workshop, we did an exercise where you take a pause for 5 seconds before you start speaking. Yeah. Working up from, for example, saying in your head or saying out loud, what you just said is important to me, because I think any exercises that help you be heavily affected by what your scene partner is saying can help to create that kind of intensity of feeling between the two characters. And for me also, I think having some kind of ritual or like demarcation of real life versus improv life is useful. It can be tricky sometimes if you're improvising romantic scenes with somebody and they then kind of take those feelings with them off stage, and maybe they have romantic feelings for you outside of the improvisation. And that kind of transference can be challenging, can hurt people, and can cause issues in improv schools or improv scenes. So I think even if it's just as simple as putting on makeup or a costume for going on stage, or like having a circle where everyone high fives each other before and after the improv, something that says like, okay, this is the start of the pretend and this is the end of the pretend, and who we are either side of that is different from who we are within the pretend, is useful for protecting people from just from getting into those kind of difficult situations outside of the improvising, you know. So those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, and of course, intimacy is not just about getting closer physically, but it's also the emotional connection, as you said, preparing, talking with each other, perhaps silence, and then all this, what you just said is important to me. All this connection is so important for developing the intimacy. So at the end of the day, if you have the kiss or not, but you have already laid the tools for the connection to happen, yeah? Well.
Yeah, I'm getting a kiss from my cat right now. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and any of that stuff that creates emotional intimacy is going to help with your improvising in general, you know. And it's tough because obviously for festivals, especially, you know, I'm teaching a 1 day, you know, maybe 3, maybe 6 hour class. So the way I approach it is you're not necessarily going to get to a point, especially with people you don't know or are meeting for the first time in the class, where you'd feel like extremely comfortable doing any kind of romantic or intimate scene with them. But the class is more giving you tools that you can take away, that you can keep using to practice with your own teammates, with your duo partners, with people that you meet from classes where you think, oh, actually, we might like to perform together. Can we kind of open ourselves up to each other more? But ultimately, like, time is your biggest friend with improv. All the teams that you really love are people that have been together for years, usually, or at least have been friends for years and have a really solid connection to each other, you know. And that, even with acting exercises, can be quite hard to fake, you know. And it's harder when it's improvised than when it's scripted, because when it's scripted, I think, because the words are taken care of and the blocking is taken care of, everything you're doing is taken care of, so you can just focus on your emotions. But when you're improvising, obviously, you're trying to build the plane as you're flying it, you know, so that can be more of a challenge, I think.
I think with scripted theater, you follow the script, and that's your blank check. You know what you have to do, and everyone else knows what they have to do. But when you are improvising romantic scenes or intimacy, it's still totally improvised. And sometimes people might look at you like, oh, is that the actor, the player, the person, or is that the character in the scene? Yeah. Yeah,
right.
Is that little doubt?
Yeah, and again, like, the trust that the actor is not just trying to find excuses to touch you up on stage. Yeah. That level of trust, again, only really comes with time. I think, you know, the exercises that we did in class kind of allowed people to skip ahead a little bit, because you know, okay, this is being framed in the context of Rhiannon's giving us an exercise where we are giving each other permission to touch each other. But we know that it's fully contained within this class, and when we leave, that's not going to continue. No. But yeah, if you're on stage with someone and maybe you've known them for a little while and you get on with them, and then suddenly they start touching you out of nowhere, your body can, and your emotions can go, oh, where's this coming from? Are you just doing this because you want an excuse to touch me, or are you doing this in service of the show? Or, you know, what are your motives behind doing this? So yeah, I guess talking, communicating about everything is how you get past those moments of discomfort, you know.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any, for example, after a workshop of these, have you had any couples that have stayed together?
Not so far, not that I know of, actually. I've had couples that were already existing couples take the class as part of a larger group. But no, at least not that I'm aware of. If anyone watches this and they're like, actually, I met my partner through these classes, then please do tell me, because I would be very interested to hear if that's true. But no, as far as I know, nothing. I have not been a matchmaker. which I guess is good in a way, because it means that the opening and closing and having that contained space is working, so not that I know of, but I'll keep you posted.
No. And the opposite of that, have you had a couple that comes into a workshop and then there's trouble, they get jealous because they are like flirting with the others or something like that?
No, actually, not at all. I mean, when you were taking the class with me and Leon, Chris took the class. My partner, Chris, took the class for the first time. And I was sort of observing myself with that, because I was like, I wonder if I will feel jealous or worried or anything. But again, because I'm the one constructing the scenarios, I was like, oh yeah, Chris is just doing what they're supposed to be doing as part of the exercises. So no, not that I know of. Nobody has noticeably got in an argument with their partner in one of my classes. But again, if you're watching this and you have had a fight with your partner for the class, please do let me know, because I'd love to talk it through with you. But yeah, not to my knowledge.
And the other question is, the English culture is more like, not seeing in the eyes and not revealing any feelings, stay cold. So how can this supersede all this, Englishness when?
Yeah, it's funny. I have taught more non-English people in this class, actually. Yeah. I taught 2 weekend-long versions of this class in Athens, and the Greek improvisers there were very open. It's a much more tactile culture anyway. People hug and kiss a little more freely, I think. So they didn't really have any issues with any of it. Yeah, it's funny. I think, again, having it be in a contained space has been useful when I have had either English people or more reticent people in general taking the class. I think, again, because people are able to say, well, it's not me. I'm not trying to kiss you. Rhiannon is telling me that we're doing an exercise where we are going to do a stage kiss at the end. So I think that allows people who are maybe naturally more shy to open up a little bit, because they're being given permission to try something and fail at it. There's always the possibility, when we talk about this in the class a lot, there's always the possibility that even though we've talked about boundaries, and even though someone has said up front, yeah, I'm happy to do a stage kiss, that in the moment when it happens, they're like, oh no, I have discovered that I am not happy doing stage kisses. And if that happens, then we will talk about it. We will move through it, and they will have made that discovery that actually, no, I don't want to do that. And sometimes the only way we discover a boundary like that is if we cross it, and then we learn something about ourselves. But I think, having an environment where it's okay to try things and know that the other person is not going to blame you, know that they know that you are just doing things as part of an exercise, rather than it's just you grabbing them on stage, is useful. So I think it helps. I think doing something like this can help people who are more reluctant to be physical or intimate with each other to kind of come out of that a little bit, because there's a safe or safer way for them to try it, where they are not the person who's going to take the fall if it goes wrong,
Mm-hmm.
I think, like you said, communication is key. Communication before you start doing these things, communication during the process and afterwards, or when you feel that boundaries are crossed, and that gives trust in the troupe. But I always think when you see these romance or intimacy scenes on stage, it always gives me a feeling that I watch a troupe who are feeling very confident with each other. They trust each other, and they allow to go to certain things, to do things which other troupes are reluctant to do, and they always keep a very long or safe distance between each other. I mean, you see the difference between the shows, and it's nice to see a little bit of romance or intimacy.
Yeah, and also I think people are very good at reading other people. People are good at reading body language. And, you know, I think it's generally pretty easy to see the difference between a troupe who are genuinely comfortable enough with each other to do the things they're doing, and, you know, a scene where one party is kind of forcing something to happen that the other person isn't comfortable with.
Yes.
I think you can tell largely if someone is having an unpleasant surprise on stage, you know.
Yeah.
I've certainly been at mixer shows in festivals where I've noticed, oh, somebody did something on stage there that someone wasn't comfortable with. Not necessarily romance, even just like picking people up. I don't know why. That's a real like classic new improviser move. I think because they're just excited, like, oh, we can do anything. But then actually that's not a very pleasant surprise for some people. And you don't necessarily want to be picked up by someone if you don't know that they can actually carry you. Or you know, I've seen shows where someone stands on a really wobbly chair, and then the audience is completely removed from whatever is happening in the narrative of the show because they're worried about whether the performer is going to fall off that wobbly chair. Yeah. And I think, yeah, an audience can tell whether you're taking a risk in a safe way, or taking a risk in a way that everyone on stage is on board with, or whether you're just like doing something that's completely reckless. And I mean, there's a fine line between reckless and brave, but I think people can feel that the difference in energy or the difference in response to those things, you know. And ultimately you want the audience to feel comfortable. You want the audience to feel safe. An audience isn't going to enjoy your performance if they're just worried about you as a performer during the performance, you know.
Like they say, they like that the character gets into problems, but not the performer or the actor.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you go and see a circus performer who's doing like, you know, death-defying stunts, usually they're working up to it. You see them do something smaller first, and then they gradually work up to the big finish. And it's partly because they're kind of heightening the performance, but it's partly so you can see actually that guy can do all of this trapeze stuff without falling to his death and breaking his neck, you know. Yeah. You need to be able to trust a performer for them to be able to give you that kind of spectacle, you know.
Well, that's interesting. How can you do this intimacy online? Because there's no touching.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, certainly. And I started teaching online during the pandemic because there were no alternatives. So in some ways it allows people to be, or to portray more intimacy than they could in person, because we're just either showing it on screen, or in some cases I do audio only classes where people are just describing what's happening. And because you don't have to touch each other, you can describe stuff that is even more intimate and even more full on, I guess, than you could do on stage comfortably, or that you might feel comfortable doing on stage. So there's a lot of like, you know, cheating to camera. When I directed when I directed the Love Circle at the Hideout Theatre online during the pandemic, we had a really brilliant tech, Charlotte Brianne Brown, who does loads of online tech stuff, who kind of helped with framing the videos so that we could make it look as though people were sat opposite each other at a table or in bed together and things like that. And we really mixed having people on screen and off screen to kind of create the atmosphere of an intimate scene. So in many ways, it is actually more liberating than being on stage, because you don't have the obstacle of having to physically portray fully what you're trying to portray in terms of the story. But yeah, there are certain exercises that obviously it's not possible to practice online, like the exercise that we did in Lyon, where at the sort of opening of the class, we were in pairs and just practicing touching each other in different parts of the body to check in with how we felt comfortable with being touched. Asking permission, can I stroke your chin? Can I hold your face? Can I hug you? That is obviously not something that is practicable online as such, but there are different things that are possible online that are less possible in person. So it's just a different thing, really. And we're practicing different skills. But yeah, it's been really good fun. I really enjoy teaching online.
Yeah, you can just be sending kisses.
Yeah, exactly. We worked a lot with like how you frame yourself within the screen so that it looks as though you're kind of hugging up to somebody in bed, or you're the tech closing off the screen as people lean in to kiss each other, so that you don't have the awkwardness of like, oh, my nose is up against the camera. It presents a whole bunch of challenges, but then it also presents a bunch of new things that you get to try as well, which is really fun and exciting.
And eventually when you come on stage, you can also use these new tools you learned online.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk through a lot of the in-person exercises that I like to use, and I encourage people, if they have a troupe that they work with in person, like, these are tools that I'm giving to people to use. They're not like one-time things that I only want you to do when you're with me. I really like to hear that people are like, oh, well, I took this class and then I went back to my usual practice group and we did a session where we just worked on intimacy together, Yeah.
It has been a great experience to listen about improv and intimacy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Okay,
thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye.